Welcome to ATV's special broadcast. I'm Anthony Martinez. Today we have the pleasure to be joined by Nicholas Krsitof of the New York Times. Since 2001, Kristof has served as a bi-weekly columnist for the op-ed section. Originally hailing from a sheep and cherry farm in Oregon, Kristof went on to graduate from Harvard College, studied law at Oxford University as a Rhodes Scholar, and studied Arabic in Cairo. First joining the New York Times in 1984, Kristof covered economics, and through the decades he has served as a correspondent in Los Angeles, as bureau chief in Hong Kong, Beijing, and Tokyo. In 2000, he covered the presidential campaign, and in particular, then-Governor George W. Bush. In his writings, Kristof places an emphasis on human rights, social injustice, such as human trafficking, and the conflict in Darfur. His columns have often focused on global health, poverty, and gender issues in the developing world. Now we have the pleasure to be joined by Mr. Kristof here in studio. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
All right, let's start with the Obama administration. Recently, on September 5th, you wrote an op-ed giving him a report card on his first term. And something interesting I'm just going to quote is you say, "In his first term, he has been disappointing. The economy remains weak, housing is a mess, and for a man with a silver tongue, he has been a wretched communicator."
I don't believe in great inflation, as you can see.
Okay, that doesn't sound like someone who's going to get reelected easily.
Oh, I mean, I would guess that he probably will be reelected. Look, I mean, I think there have been real problems with the Obama administration, but at the end of the day, the election is not a referendum, it's a choice. And I think that a lot of voters share a measure of disappointment. I think, frankly, President Obama shares a certain amount of that disappointment. And but at the end of the day, I think they also have real problems with Mitt Romney.
So you believe that America's discontent with Obama isn't enough to elect Mitt Romney?
Well, look, I don't have a crystal ball. I tend to believe, I like In Trade, the Irish betting site is, I think it's maybe better than any given pundit, and they have odds of about 58% that Obama will be reelected. And that feels roughly right to me. He got a bounce out of the convention, Romney didn't. I think that a lot of the swing states right now are looking pretty good for Obama. So, I mean, I'd certainly much rather be in Obama's shoes right now than Governor Romney's.
One interesting thing was in foreign policy, you gave him a B+. Many people would say perhaps foreign policy is his strongest area. Why a B+ and not an A like you did for education, which you gave him an A-?
A-. Yeah, I really think education has been his strongest suit and hasn't gotten enough attention, and especially on a university campus, I think education needs to be plugged. I also just think that education is maybe the biggest, greatest challenge for the country. In terms of foreign policy, I would lower it partly. I mean, I think that it's generally recognized that the Afghan surge, which was one of his great bets, one of the great choices he made, has not worked out very well. He's tripled the number of troops in Afghanistan, spending $100 billion a year in present expenses, not including long-term costs. And that was a bet that, I mean, I don't think he would necessarily agree, but I think most dispassionate people think has not played out very well. And Syria, I think there's also a general feeling that he's been behind the curve on Syria, which is one of the central challenges for today. But in general, I think he's certainly done a pretty good job in foreign policy.
And communication, you gave him an F. Why is that, and do you believe that the convention speech, he's turning the ship around?
I mean, I actually thought that at the Democratic convention, you know, Bill Clinton's speech was superb. I thought Michelle Obama's speech was superb. I thought the President Obama's speech was very good, though not at their level. And for somebody who has a just extraordinary gift for communication. It really does puzzle me that one of the themes of this administration has been the difficulty communicating healthcare issue, communicating the economy, and repeatedly turning to Bill Clinton to articulate the issues at stake and why people should support the Obama administration. You do get the sense that President Obama has, certainly White House officials say that he has kind of learned on the job and has come to realize that people turn to him and they want him to speak for the government, that he has to be the national handholder in chief. And I truly do think that is indeed one of his roles. I think that he increasingly is stepping up to the plate on that, and I think that is a good omen for directions to come. But communications, it's certainly, who would have thought that that would be the area where he would be weak?
Now let's talk about Republican communication. Do you believe that Mitt Romney did the job he was supposed to do in his acceptance speech in Tampa?
I thought the Republican speeches in general were much weaker. They have two big problems. One is that Mitt Romney was pulled so far to the right during the primaries that for somebody who was already accused of being a flip-flopper, he needs to flop again to compete for middle-of-the-road voters in the general election. On the other hand, then he's vulnerable to the flip-flopping charge once more. And at the end of the day also, I think the content of his platform is not one that intuitively appeals to undecided voters in Ohio or Florida. And so I think he had an uphill fight. I think to some degree he worked at humanizing himself. Again, Romney did a pretty good job there. I don't think he did a very good job of persuading voters why his platform would be better. And that left a real vacuum for Bill Clinton to fill.
Why do you believe Obama has been AWOL on Syria? He's gone through the UN and tried to do the diplomatic solutions that way. Why so much criticism?
One of the classic problems with any White House on foreign policy is that there are typically no good solutions to any problem. And Syria is a classic example of that. And if there are no good solutions, then on any given day, it's always easier to postpone it for the next day. And so there are, all of the options in Syria are pretty awful. There's a real debate within the administration about what to do. And I think the upshot is it keeps getting deferred and delayed.
Do you think anything's going to happen before the election?
On Syria?
Yes.
My hunch would be only marginal movements of the kind we're seeing, marginally greater engagement with the rebels, marginally greater engagement with Turkey and some of the Arab states, but nothing profound.
All right, and on that note, we're going to take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back. Now, I read in your bio that you studied in Cairo for some time when you were younger. Can you talk about what you've seen in the difference in Egypt from when you went in the 80s, I believe, to now after the Arab Spring? What's
really depressing is how little change there was. I studied in Egypt, studied Arabic from 1983 to 1984, and then left and spent most of my career after that in East Asia, in China, Hong Kong, Japan. And China, every time you go to Shanghai, for example, it's a different Shanghai. It's transformed. Beijing, every time you go, if you've been away for a few months, then it's a new Beijing. Cairo, unfortunately, is exactly the same Cairo pretty much today as it was back in 1983. That's in terms of infrastructure, the state of civil society, and until recently it was true of Mubarak being the local dictator. Now that has been overthrown, and so we'll see where things go. But I think that it's a reminder that too often we in the West, perceive stability and value stability, but that disguises tectonic plates that are shifting, and it ultimately force change. And I think we should be a lot more careful about embracing that.
What do you see in the future for Egypt?
I'm more optimistic about Egypt than a lot of people are, which isn't terribly hard. I think Egypt will tend to muddle along. I think that it's probably that the Muslim Brotherhood is going to be a mixed bag, that they will periodically repress some people. It's probably not going to be as good for women as I would like, but that they will in the end have to be responsive to voters to some degree, and that people want honest government. They want economic growth.
And now to pivot to another story, something you write a lot about is human trafficking, both here at home and abroad. One of the touching stories I read was the one about Brianna from New York here. Can you talk about what is the similarities between and what are the major differences between human trafficking here in the United States and abroad?
One of the great misperceptions about human trafficking in the U.S. is that it mostly involves foreign women smuggled into the U.S. And that is indeed part of it. But the worst problems in terms of the abuse and the cruelty and in terms of the age of people involves local homegrown girls who, typically it's a 13-year-old who has a tough relationship with her mom. She runs away from home, ends up at the bus station, and there's a pimp out looking for girls like her. And whether we're talking about India and Pakistan or whether we're talking about Washington and New York, the pimps are the most extraordinary manipulators of these girls. The notion that a pimp is a business partner of these girls is a complete misunderstanding of that relationship. And it boggles the mind to me that the police go after these girls and arrest them and throw them in jail and don't go after the pimps and the johns.
Why do you believe this hasn't been part of the national discourse?
I think that because too many Americans, when they're driving by, they see some girl in some teenage girl who's out trolling for clients. She's wearing utterly inappropriate clothing, and they think, they assume that it's much more voluntary than it is. And they don't understand the degree to which every penny that she earns is going to that pimp, and that she, on and off, she will indeed think that she loves her pimp, but when she tries to run away, he's beating her up, and if she doesn't earn her quota, then he's beating her up.
So how do you get 20-something-year-olds, college students, high school seniors, to get involved, to do something? How do you get university students, the millennium generation, to do something about something like that that's happening here at home?
I'm really high on your generation, frankly. I mean, I really see so many young people who really care about the world and are a lot more creative about how they go about bringing changes than my generation was. My generation was really pretty awful at it. We sought kind of symbolic changes, and that often didn't really accomplish much. And your generation is about social entrepreneurship and figuring out how to make a difference at the margins that is real. So, hats off to you.
All right, and on that point, we're going to take a commercial break. Now, something interesting I read when I digged deep was that in 2004, in Cambodia, I believe it was, you purchased 2 teenage prostitutes from their pimp. I believe it was for $150 American, about.
One was $150, the other was just over $200.
My question to you is, why did you do that? And you travel the world, you see atrocities all over. When do you decide to step in and buy their freedom for them, and when not to? When just to be an observer?
This is a really hard question, and there's no easy answer, and I often feel like I'm walking a difficult line on that. Look, at the end of the day, buying girls from their pimps is not a generalized solution. It basically just drives up the price of the girls and creates an incentive to kidnap more girls and sell them to pimps. So it's not a general solution. On the other hand, these were 2 girls who had helped me. I knew that I'd interviewed them, spent time with them, knew that I was going to be getting praise for the columns I wrote about them, and I didn't want them to stay behind and die of AIDS in the brothel. And I also figured that if I wrote about them, wrote about their progress, followed them, that would be a vehicle to write about these broader issues. And indeed, I'm still in touch with them.
How are they doing?
They're a chapter in the Half the Sky book. One of them worked out pretty well, kind of right from the start. The other ran back to the brothel. It turned out that she was addicted to methamphetamine, which she got from the brothel. And I thought for a long time that it was kind of hopeless, but in the end, the brothel was essentially closed down. The police kept demanding more in bribes. It became unprofitable to run the brothel, and so the brothel was closed down, and so she's out.
That's good to hear. One reason why you are so popular among the current millennium generation is your usage of social media, from your blog On the Ground to Facebook to Twitter to Google Hangout. You were one of the first people at the New York Times to blog online on its website. What value have you gotten from social media, and where do you see it going in the future?
Well, your generation are the experts. I need to ask you guys that. But I must say that in the last couple of days, I've been struck by how many AU people have been tweeting about my arrival. So you folks are all over Twitter in a way that is not usually true of campus visits. Look, one of the I want to have an audience, and I write about issues that are, they're not on the agenda. They're pretty easy to exclude. So I want to do everything I can to get people to read about things that I care about. And if students are on Facebook, then I want to go there. If people are on Twitter, I want to go there.
Did you get a lot of grief from your colleagues in the beginning, coming from print and embracing these new mediums?
Yeah, I did. There was a sense that we don't really need to play in that sandbox, and it's a little bit beneath us. And then there's also the concern, and it's something that I worry a little bit about, is making a mistake. I mean, look, I often tweet when I'm jet lagged at 2 a.m. and I'm trying to be edgy and just on the proper side of the line. And sometime I'm going to make a really dumb mistake and say something incredibly stupid, and then it'll be out there. And but fortunately,
but you haven't done that yet.
At least if I have, nobody's noticed.
And one last question, because they're telling us we have to wrap. Next place you're going?
I don't tend to talk about trips ahead of time, just in case you get dictators watching your show. I wouldn't want to tip them off.
We applaud you, and someone has to do it, and we're glad it's you.
Thanks
you for
so much.
joining us. That's all for this edition of Special Broadcast. Thank you for joining us.